Perfect. Okay. I think we should get started. Just get this last one. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our next AI in Health and Social Care session. We're a group of people just interested in having a conversation about what's happening around artificial intelligence within our sector. And thank you all for those who are able to join us right now. There are a number of people still trying to connect, just having a couple of technical issues with WebEx. We'll try and sort those out and juggle those throughout the session. We are recording this session, so we'll be sharing it on YouTube afterwards. And there was also a Facebook group that you're more than welcome to sign up to. I'll share those details in the chat box in a second. I just wanted to walk us through a couple of things that we're going to do today. We're going to ask people to contribute. First of all, contributing in the chat box, which is in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And we really just want people to connect with each other and share about some of the work that they're working on. But just so we can keep track of the conversations and who's talking to who, what's really helpful is if you're responding to somebody's comment that they've made, for example, about me living in Birmingham, if you can just respond with at the person's name, so for example, at Dominic Cushionen, or at Dom, just to say, Dom, that's great, what's the weather like in Birmingham? That gives us context as to how we can see where the thread of conversations are going. The other thing that we'll be doing is unmuting some people throughout the session. So if you do have anything you want to say to the rest of the group verbally, feel free to message myself and John. We'll be co-facilitating today and introducing our colleagues Nicola and Hugh with their sessions. So feel free to message me directly or so that's my emails going as people are trying to connect. So apologies about that. So we've got Hugh Harvey and Nicola Calder will be discussing their sessions with us today. You can follow both these people on Twitter, at Dr. Hugh Harvey and at Nicola Calder 7, and you'll be able to follow some of the conversations they're having with other people around artificial intelligence, both as prolific Twitter users and provide a lot of valuable information. So feel free to connect with those. We'll also be using the hashtag AI community. So if you have anything you want to share or any contents or documents or anything that you find of valuable or interest, please use the hashtag AI community, and we'll be able to collate those and share those back with the community. We'll also be using Facebook, which I'll share the details in the chat box now in a second. But when we get started, we just want to quickly ask those that have joined us now where you've come from in the country, just so we can see where people are coming from in relative location to each other. I'm just going to assign some privileges so people can do that. Let me do that now. So over in the top left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a little arrow that looks like a pointer, and you'll have a couple of other icons. If you use the pointer icon, you'll be able to see that I'm from Birmingham. Great to see some familiar faces and some new ones. Hopefully your Wi-Fi connection lasts Mark while you're on the train. And if you're connecting with the chat box, if you can use the drop-down menu, just select on all participants so that we can connect everybody together, unless you want to message me privately. If you are international, there is over on the left-hand side, we've got box for international. Okay, so a good mix of people from across the country. Yorkshire, of course. So just to remind people what we'll be talking about, for the first couple of minutes, I'm just going to talk about why we're here, what we're trying to do, and then I'm going to hand over to Nicola, who's going to talk about some reflections that she's had from the evidence sessions of the Parliamentary Select Committee on AI. And then we're going to hand over to Hugh Harvey, who's going to talk about radiology and how we can make Britain the best in the world. And then I'm going to open it up to you guys to have a conversation about anything else that you feel that you would like to discuss, and maybe some of the resources or content that you've seen recently that you think is relevant to sharing with the rest of us. And just to keep us understanding where we're all at, just to ask a couple of questions about how confident you are in understanding AI. So whereabout are you in the spectrum of understanding what AI is and what it means? We've got from the very bottom a keen explorer, so those of us who are keen explorers, and those of us who are experts who are coding and using algorithms on a regular basis. Thank you, thanks Phil. So we can see here that we're going to have we've got a diverse range of people joining this community, those who are on the early stages of exploring what AI means for them and means for the health system, and those that are currently using it within their jobs. And one of the things we want to keep asking the community here is, the types of content that we're providing is going to be different and more accessible for different people. So if you're finding we're not giving enough detail, please come back to us and we can start adding more detailed conversations in. If you find the content a little bit too heavy, please say as well, and we can try and make things a little bit more accessible as well. And then just so we know who we're talking to as well, whereabouts do you come from? Are you coming from an NHS organization? Who do you represent? Are you a patient? Are you in research? Are you a vendor? Are you currently selling AI algorithms? Thanks, John, for representing social care. Thank you. So over to the next section. What we want to make sure is that this community is not just about broadcasting, sending information out. We really want you guys to help us develop the content and develop what it is that we want to be talking about. So what we'd like to ask you individually is if you have any expertise or if you've got some bits and pieces that you're currently working on, is there anything that you can give back to the community? So do you have any examples of implementation and exploratory projects? Do you have anything around ethics? Are you working in contracting, for example, something that you and I are quite interested in, or anything else? Right, so those of us who have some things to offer, it would be really good to connect with you afterwards to see how we can build this into the future sessions, especially those that have examples of implementation or are working on exploratory projects. If you have any of those that you are happy enough sharing, please drop it into the chat box as well and share with our colleagues about what it is that you're working on, and we can tie those conversations up. So why are we here? So no, that was yesterday. Nope. Not sure where that's coming from. Mark, you're just going to mute you if that's okay. Sorry. So the conversation today is based on the fundamental law of new power. We talk about new power and old power. We talk about, waiting on current systems and structures to guide us and direct us. And we also talk about new power, where people are moving with the energy and moving with what people want to do and are motivated by. So in this case, we're using David Weiner's example of some of the expertise of the people in the room in this group is greater than the expertise of those presenting. So not saying that Nicola and Hugh are not necessarily the experts in their field, they definitely are, but we want to open that up to the rest of the people as well. And what we also want to do is we want to cultivate some relationships. When change happens, it's really based on relationships and trust. So the idea of these monthly sessions is for us to connect with each other and share regularly about what we're working on and build that trust and see how we can work together for the future of the health system that we all want to strive for. And one of the bits that really interests me is this research that was done by Innovisor, which is about organizational change. And those who are influencers within the organization, we typically find around 3% of individuals within an organization have the greater typically drive conversations around 85% of the organization. And we feel that, definitely people in this community would most likely be seen in that 3% of driving the conversation in the wider system and both at home in their own organization. So we look forward to working with you. And the reason why we're doing this as a virtual session and having a conversation is that we find that there's loads of documents out there, as Nicola's spent her time reading quite a lot of the committee's documents. One of the best ways to share knowledge is through having conversations and discussions. And Nick Milton's done some research around this, and it's proven that it's 14 times more effective than those best practice databases and toolkits. And using Myron's maxims, so if those of you who are familiar with Myron Rogers, a leader in communities of practice, what we really want to do is look at getting people to own what they create. And this is you guys really. And finding that real change takes place in real work. So finding those examples of where we can apply some interesting machine learning or other algorithms to our work and building some evidence behind them. And then what we want to do is just start anywhere and follow it everywhere. So we're finding that lots of people are having lots of interesting conversations after these sessions and leading into different directions, for example, around data, which is something we'll come back to. Now we've kind of given context. Is there any questions or comments that anybody would like to discuss on this? Anybody in the chat box or anything you're picking up there, John? Yeah, so in terms of the arm's length bodies, a number of people are interested in getting involved in this conversation. That's something that is being currently worked on with a number of them to work on how we can collaborate on this, going where the energy is, so it's not waiting on people to build these conversations. Sorry, just mute Mark. And I'm now going to hand over to Nicola, if that's okay. I'll hand over to you to talk about your session, Reflections from the Evidence Sessions Parliamentary Select Committee for AI.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks for having me to talk today. I'm very much on the beginning of the journey about AI, and I found Twitter enormously useful, actually, both with connecting with yourself and other like-minded individuals who are very curious about this. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, it's really just to summarise my thoughts and feelings about some of the evidence sessions that I've both read, so there's written evidence and oral evidence in the form of some of the committee hearings. So just to summarise the function of the AI Select Committee for Artificial Intelligence, there was a call for evidence in July earlier this year, and the remit around the evidence was for economic, social and health implications of advances in AI, and all interested individuals and organisations were invited to participate. So today I think there's been about 16 oral sessions, and these commenced at the beginning of October. They're all available on the Parliamentary Committee website for people to look at or to read. There's 208 submissions of written evidence, and these have been received from a wide sort of stakeholder groups. Notable submissions for us in healthcare, health and social care, were from Google. Google DeepMinder, of course, are in partnership with the NHS at the minute. Cancer Research UK, the Academy of Medical Sciences, which is the overarching body that informs the curricula in the Royal Colleges for medical education, and also the Royal College of Radiologists, which, as I understand, Hughes actually submitted that. There will be a report published at the beginning of next year, probably around April time, which will be an evidence synthesis, and that's going to help inform the public policy going forwards for AI. As I mentioned, there's a wide variety of stakeholders, so representatives from law, ethics, industry, research, academia, And a notable absence of submission from me was from the Royal College of Pathologists. So my background has been in diagnostics as a scientist, working in the NHS and also in research. And in the recent Life Science Industrial Strategy that was published, there is support to try and get AI decision support in digital pathology. So that was quite sort of noticeable for me. So in terms of the impact of technology, what seems to be the rule of thumb for humans is we tend to underestimate the impact of change through technology, but overestimate the speed of it. So for example, when we look back at the early 90s when Tim Berners-Lee developed the World Wide Web, the global disruption that ensued sort of 15, 20 years later, I don't think he could have possibly anticipated that. It was originally just set up for physicists at CERN. And likewise, 25 years ago, when we first started text messaging and sending emails to each other, little did we realize how it would change the social fabric of the nature of business interactions. So generally looking at the evidence in the sessions, and I've probably listened to about 4 or 5 of the oral sessions, read those notable documents, and kind of listening and reading, there is almost like a general hype, hope and horror about AI in the 4th Industrial Revolution. So what seems to be coming out loud and clear about AI, automation, robotics, and also algorithms, particularly machine learning algorithms, is that it's going to massively transform the world of work right across the sectors. The estimations of how much it's going to impact do seem to vary, but sort of 20 to 40% of jobs are at risk of automation. And the biggest predicted impact, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, is going to be in the health sector and also transport, so automated driving, for example. The major disruption that I really see is that our sort of approach to work and life, that model that we've built over the last 100 years or so, that 20 years of education and then 40 years of work, is going to kind of get really disrupted, and understanding what a lifelong learning commitment is going to be the next challenge, really. Fundamentally as well, if we are going to be replacing 20 to 4% of jobs, how is the social support system and our governments going to support us in that? So there's lots of discussions around universal basic income, universal basic service supports. These are radical support structures that society needs to explore and have very deep conversations about. Depending on who you talk to about UBI, they might think of it as their political leanings as some sort of communism. It's very interesting when you talk to people about that. So pretty new stuff for people to get their heads around. And the other thing for me was what came out of one of the sessions was there's an enormous amount of capability in this country in AI. There's about 600 startups, as I understand, and in Europe there's about 1,600 in total. So we seem to have a bit of the lion's share of the skills and the expertise. But are we actually investing enough in the education and the research to be able to grow and develop the AI industry and the economy? And we've got Brexit looming over the horizon, of course. And also, the government needs to invest in SMEs to encourage the development of research and translation. The other downside, I think, of sort of the horror side of things is the way that we've seen sort of this disruption in politics on platforms such as Facebook at the minute, and probably people not really understanding about the power of some algorithms when you start to debate and listen to people in silos and echo chambers. There is some sort of evidence now that people are becoming less likely to trust authorities, sort of people in universities, people are using public trust, risk of growing inequality. And one of the fascinating things, sort of listening to people like Nick Bostrom, who's from the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, he's the guy who actually wrote the paper on Are We Living in a Simulation? So he's at a very different level when he's talking about these sort of things. But he's quite pessimistic about artificial general intelligence, and the likes of Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking have also expressed concerns, big disruptors, big thinkers. And, these sort of viewpoints versus somebody like Ray Kurzweil, one of the Google innovators, he's very optimistic and almost laid back about it, who thinks, interfacing with BCIs is the way forward, and we'll be fine. So, you know, these AI doomsday scenarios versus creating a better future, it's very interesting to explore that. And I certainly feel at the beginning of this journey that I really don't know what the answer is to any of that. So where can AI disrupt in healthcare? Well, we've already started to see that, haven't we, really? Dom probably knows a lot more about this than I currently do, but with the GP at Hand pilot that's currently going on in London, we've also got Babylon Health, Push Doctor, Doctor Now. You know, the doctor will see you now on your smartphone with triage service algorithms. We're starting to see some papers come through now around algorithms outperforming dermatopathologists. There was a paper in Nature earlier this year. I'd let Hugh go into the radiology side of things, but really AI and algorithms and sort of convoluted neural nets are going to disrupt where we recognise patterns and changes. So that's really in everything where we're using imaging to make diagnostic decisions. So radiology, pathology, histopathology, digitised images in those, dermatopathology, etc. So on reflection, I've been kind of looking out for my specialist interest area, which was haematology, to see whether there's anything emerging in AI, because about 10 years ago I started to do digital morphology. So that's in haematology, you sometimes have a test where you either a scientist or a haematology consultant will look down a microscope at your cells to look at the different changes to see whether there's infection there or if there's anything malignant going on. And it's always seemed to me that digital pathology, or digital morphology rather, in haematology has been very underutilised and not captured. So we're starting to see now some papers come through. There's one in Clinical Chem this month about using convolutional neural networks to actually aid our decision making on red cell morphology. And there was an interesting paper in PLOS about using the same sort of algorithms to diagnose things like sickle cell disease. Rather than a human being sat making a subjective decision and spending hours and hours looking down a microscope, it looks like we can kind of speed up this work now. The BSH as well, interestingly, last week I found have put out an essay prize on discussing the possible roles of artificial intelligence in the future practice of haematology. So that's gone out to all undergraduate medical students, and I've sent that around to all the students that I know in sort of scientist training as well. And it's interesting to see that, because currently in the curricula there isn't anything about this. There isn't anything about the technological side of how algorithms will support doctors and scientists in training. So interesting to see that. So the key issues for health and social care that I've taken away really is what the two issues are really about: the data, the governance around the data, the importance of the data. You know, data is the new oil. We see this sort of bandied around a bit. You know, I've heard the term the NHS is going to be like ExxonMobil. We can create a wealth from data. You know, is this possible? Is it just hype, or is it actual hope? Can the NHS begin to self-fund? But if we sell data, the ethics around that is very controversial at the minute, because who profits from it 15, 20 years down the line? Data's probably a bit like the crown jewels. It's locked down, it's inaccessible, it's a bit, you know, privacy versus confidentiality is a bit of an issue for the public to get their head around. We need to sell it to them that, you know, data sharing can potentially save lives, but we've got to get it right. We know around some of the issues with Google DeepMind and the Streams app, for example, earlier this year, with the Data Guardian having to get involved because of the transparency issues and lack of audit. But it does seem to me that data is the essential thing we need to understand in terms of education, because the accuracy and the robustness of algorithms is going to be dependent on the quality of that data. And accessing in it, and building and testing the algorithms, and you know what data goes into that. And also, interestingly, for me, I'm not quite sure about the legal framework for AI. Is the MHRA, as the regulatory structure, going to be building and developing and translating? Is that fit for purpose at the minute? It seems it's going to fit in with the EU directive, but that was some years ago, before any of this came out. And obviously we've got the GDPR, which is going to be coming out pretty soon. So data was the one side of things, the governance around it. And then education for me, because currently in my role in HEE, I'm involved in sort of scientist training, commissioning, those sorts of programs. And do we have a workforce that understands the impact of this and how disruptive it's going to be? I'd say there are a few people in the NHS at that level, but on the whole, no. Computer science needs to be more prominent in STEM. At GCSE level, I don't think, compared to some countries, we've got enough kids actually doing this sort of stuff. And AI is actually, it's not just about the science or the computational aspects. It's very cross-cutting. It's going to impact, or the potential to impact, across all sorts of different areas. And it seems that if we are developing algorithms and building algorithms, we need to be thinking about ethics, the philosophy about what we're doing, and the social and political impact of them. So it's truly multidisciplinary. Do we have enough teachers? Do we have enough academics to teach people about this stuff? Do we need to educate the educators, train the trainers? And what seems to be essential coming out from the sessions is about fueling education and research in this area. We really need to step this up. PhDs, we need a lot more PhD level researchers, MSc level for implementation. And there does seem to be at the minute a bit of a brain drain from academia to the tech industry because they pay more. And obviously there's a lot of exciting things going on in those big tech companies as well. So these are just some questions that I really want to put out to the community, really. Education, development and raising awareness. So really some education around data and information governance. It really needs some public scrutiny and debate, I think, much more so than it has at the minute, about health data, what it means to share data, what it means to own data. If you've had some tests done in the NHS and that data is in the system owns that data, but it's about respecting your privacy and if you want that to be confidential. Can we share data to improve population health, utilising these for algorithms? What are the risks? What are the rewards? Impact on roles, skills, repertoire that's going to be in healthcare. Can a nurse explain that an algorithm has provided decision support to a patient, for example? Is that the level that we need to get to if a patient really asks about who's made that decision? How much how much understanding do we need versus how much awareness? So who needs to be really understanding of what an algorithm is, how it's built and how it's developed, for things like understanding bias in systems? Where will the technical expertise sit? Is it going to be in the NHS or is it actually going to be in the tech industries? Will adopting this technology require us to think in new ways, working and partnering with industry, which I think some people may find uncomfortable? I find this quite interesting because in pathology over the last 20-25 years, in diagnostics pathology, we've steadily seen that happen actually. We have a system now where we have managed system service contracts, and we work in partnership with industry. People like Roche or Siemens come in and they basically furnish the lab with robotics and equipment in a very sort of closed down system. And the advantage for that is it's very highly regulated and we have engineers on site and we're able to give fantastic turnaround times. But it does close the lid somewhat on innovation. We don't develop and grow our own tests as much in the NHS. So at the minute, who is the NHS developing in this sort of technical area? We've got the Digital Academy with 300 Chief Clinical Information Officers and Chief Clinical Information Officers. They're going to be developed over the next year or two, I think that is. And what's really good about this is there will be board level strategic input, influential, and will be what I think is the role of the future, which is the clinician and informatician. And it's also multi-professional, which is really good. So it's not just medics, it's not just nurses. Hopefully there might be some AHPs in there or scientists at some point. And it seems to me that in the future, this is what we're going to need at that level, at that leadership level, people who really understand technology and the application of it and the implementation of it. We're also developing bioinformaticians at level 7 and level 8, so that's at master's level and at doctoral level. to research, translate, innovate, and implement. And this has really been to support the genomics 100,000 genome project, to be able to understand that information that's coming back and to be able to translate it into clinically actionable results in multidisciplinary teams, including scientists now. We've also got, as I understand, an apprentice standard data scientist degree, apprentice at level 6, so that's degree level, that's in implementation. Because one question I have is, where are all the data scientists in the NHS? Where are they? I don't know where they are, if we've got any, or if we need lots more. And also HE have got a Building a Digital Ready Workforce workshop, and that's an opportunity to implement or to participate in a workshop to see where we need to develop and put investment into education and training around the digital ready workforce. And also the Genomics Education Programme by HE, the 100,000 Genome Project, which started a few years ago now, it coincided with the launch of the Genomics Education Programme. So that was in 2015, I think, or 2014, so it was a 4-year programme. And it was an education programme with £20 million funding to target the whole of the workforce in the NHS. So from commissioners, managers, through to high-level clinical and laboratory geneticists. But what we did, we used like a tier approach to see where it would be best to target the education. So at the top level of that triangle, we were very specific about targeting the clinical and laboratory geneticists, molecular pathologists, those who work in haematology and bioinformatics. And then further down, we developed just-in-time educational resources about raising awareness, understanding what genomics is. It's just a test. It can be used in 3 different ways, for example, and developing signposts for people who perhaps didn't need to have any sort of expertise about it. But it was a multi-professional approach, and I'm wondering what we can learn from that, perhaps with AI. And what resources do we need? Well, there's actually a lot out there. When you're looking at machine learning in particular, there's quite a lot of courses on Coursera, FutureLearn, edX, EMBL, GEP, so that's the Genomics Education Programme. They're all freely available, but what we don't currently have is a quality assessment about really who should be using them and what will come out the other end once you've actually utilised them. The GSIP, so that's Genomics England Clinical Interpretation Partnership, that is it's a research faculty, and they also have people in there who work in clinical academia, and they're working on machine learning algorithms as well, so that might be a resource we can tap. Definitely really unsure about the current future curricula for medical and nursing, what we really need to be doing there, and how we keep up with this continual changing environment that we're in with technology. As I say, it will require lifelong learning, and how we do that, we need to challenge that. But underneath it all, I suppose the big thing for me is about patient safety. That's the golden thread. We want to be introducing things into the NHS. We want to innovate and we want to translate, but we want to do it where we've got evidence and where we know we can see patient benefit. As Hal would say, it can only be attributable to human error. So thank you for listening. Be very interested to see what people have to say about this.
Nicola, thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking the time to put some of this together. I think you're definitely one of my few people that I know that have got the most curious minds, constantly finding things. So thank you very much for pulling this together. And I totally agree, patient safety is the golden thread, and I think that's one of the key things we need to keep in our vision. It's not about the technology, it's about what we're doing for our patients. John, before I come over to you, I just wanted to ask the audience, has anybody got any questions or comments or anything else they found with regards to what Nicola's been saying, or anything that resonates with that? A lot of people saying thank you very much, and I think there's a couple of messages that have come to me directly as well, which I'll send to you as well, Nicola, which are very helpful. the black box AI needs to be accountable. Have you had any thoughts on that, Nicola, in terms of the black box? I know we'll head over to Hugh in a moment about the radiology side of things.
Yeah,
this might
it is. I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, I didn't mention that, but yeah, absolutely. The black box is the thing that people seem to be quite worried about, or some people seem to be quite worried about. The thing for me is that if you were asked somebody how they made a decision, would they be able to tell you? So it's almost like our brains are a bit of a black box, really. But I think there is maybe somebody who can explain it a bit better in the technology field, who thinks there might be a way that we can get algorithms to kind of tell us not necessarily how they've come to that decision, but the way that they came to it, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think that's something that, again, in terms of the public engagement and also our understanding and education, is something that needs to go into the mix.
Yeah. And just there was a comment there in terms of education as well. I think this is one of the things I've been discussing with colleagues about, even this community, because we're so diverse in our understanding of AI and even some of the technical and data science side of things. Is there a bit where maybe we can signpost to some of those interesting courses where we can individually upskill ourselves? Have you got any thoughts on that, Nicola, or anything? Because I know you've been doing.
Yeah, I think there are. But as I understand it, if you do want to develop as a data scientist in machine learning, you've got to be pretty good at coding. You've got to have some pretty basic fundamentals in place. But there's a whole heap of courses that are available and have been quality assessed by, I think, somebody at Stanford on Coursera. So I shared that with you, Dom. So it's on your resources page.
Resources, yeah.
So that would be a good place for people to start if they do want to start developing themselves. But I'm thinking that there's something that we also maybe need. We need different levels where people like myself who are on the journey and want to try and help people to learn more. Is what are the fundamentals they need to understand, and do they actually need to, in their jobs, in their future, what is it they need to understand about this in order to help patients navigate the landscape as well? So I think it's quite complex. There's something about technical capability and growing that capacity, but there's also something about understanding the wider implications of the use of it. So much like a nurse, for example, who might be sending a patient off for a blood test, won't be doing it herself, but she'll be explaining to the patient about it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very true. So I think what might be good here is a number of people are messaging here. I think the bit where we can all help in this conversation is probably having a conversation with Nicola or connecting with her to see what those resources look like, and how we can support the workforce in the future, especially the role of health education in England. John, do you have anything that you want to add from some of the comments that you've been seeing over the last 30 minutes or so?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Don, and thank you very much, Nicola. So just quickly to mention some of the threads that have been going on in the chat box. It's an interesting conversation around patient and public involvement, always important, particularly sort of framed in terms of data privacy, equalities, and importance of voice, and also thinking about the unintended consequences. It's great that we've got participants from around the world, and Amin, I hope I pronounced that right, is interested, well, he's a professional radiologist, and there's an interesting question around the market for AI or the sort of health sector. Are there examples of public ownership of AI systems? Jeremy has said that data is a new marketplace, especially for AI training sets. And I think there's a key question around the value of the data in the NHS and whether the public can really benefit from that value, safely releasing that data to external companies, but perhaps considering how within the system that data can feed AI systems that become really powerful through the data, not just the algorithm.
Absolutely. And I think that ties in very nicely, John, to Hugh's session for the last 15 minutes about some of his suggestions. Hugh, are you there? Can you hear us okay?
I am. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Are you okay to, if I make you present, to share your screen then?
Yep.
So
Excellent.
While that's done, do you want to introduce yourself to those who haven't read the notes?
Sure. So I'm Hugh. I'm a consultant radiologist at Guy's and Thomas's in London. I work with the Royal College of Radiologists, helping write their policy on AI, and we sit on an AI informatics working group. I was invited to the House of Lords to give evidence to the sessions that Nicola was talking about. I also advise a couple of startups in the radiology imaging space. And my background is, after training as a radiologist, I did a research degree with machine learning as applied to MR. And then I spent a year at Babylon Health, who have also been mentioned once today already. So I've kind of got a broad spectrum background, but I'm now focusing on radiology. So today I'm going to talk about a project that I like to call BRAIN. BRAIN stands for British Radiology Artificial Intelligence Network, which is quite a nice acronym. It's an entirely theoretical organisation. What I'm doing with this idea is just trying to spread it as wide and as far as possible. And I think it fits very neatly into a lot of the areas that have already been highlighted today by Nicola, but also by the AI Select Committee of the House of Lords. And that is, how do we utilise NHS data to its fullest benefit? So the whole point of BRAIN is to empower...
Can you do me a favour and just share your screen? Sorry.
Isn't it shared?
It's not sharing at the moment now.
Hang on. How do I do that? What button do I need to press? Here we go.
That's better. And just if you can just the microphone just a little bit quiet for a couple of colleagues. Sorry, Hugh. Thank you.
Can you see the screen now?
I can see the screen.
Good.
Go for it.
So the whole point of BRAIN is to empower the UK to become the world leader in radiology artificial intelligence. And this is just simply by leveraging the amount of data that we have in the NHS. So we need to build the infrastructure for massive data at scale while ensuring that the NHS maintains control. And if we open up access for everyone to do research, we can share the benefits with everybody, including the taxpayer within the UK. So why am I particularly focused on radiology? Well, apart from being a radiologist, there's a crisis in our workforce that is very acute at the moment. The numbers here are quite shocking. We only have just under 5,000 radiologists in this country. That's fewer per 100,000 people in the population than any other country in Europe or any single state in America. We have a vacancy level of 8.5%. About a fifth of us are going to retire over the next 5 years, with only 5% increase over the next 3 years, and we're already spending hundreds of millions on outsourcing radiology reports. And demand is just growing almost exponentially. At least a 30% increase of demand over the next 3 years is expected. So there's a massive problem with the amount of radiologists in this country. So AI is posed as one solution, but there's another problem. The problem is that there are three main silos in developing AI algorithms that could be applied to radiology. And the three silos are hospitals, the experts, the data scientists, and the businesses. And the hospitals have all the data, the experts can make the algorithms, and the businesses can sort out the market and the road to the front-end user. So the hospitals need to figure out a way to anonymize their data, secure it and clean it. The experts need to be able to label that data, process it, and then validate the algorithm's work. And the businesses need to go through the regulatory procedures. They need to partner with hospitals and vendors and then ship their algorithms. And so what I'm trying to do with BRAIN is to break down these walls and create some kind of connected throughput from start to finish, which involves the NHS the whole way through. Lots of drivers, lack of radiologists, potential for AI to reduce workload, potential for increased patient safety by reducing the amount of radiological misses, potential cost savings, and there's a massive increase in spectrum of applications. I've just come back from the world's largest radiology conference in America, and it was just really encouraging to see how many startups and researchers are developing algorithms out there. And it seems like almost every aspect of radiology is being covered by someone somewhere. And finally, we can reduce overhead if we pool all our resources. I don't think any of this is possible if just one institute or one organisation is doing this. I think it needs to be very collaborative. So what is BRAIN? So at the moment, if we look at the UK and the NHS as a whole, all these blue dots represent a single hospital. And so let's zoom in on one hospital, and this hospital decides that, yeah, it's going to open up data access to some researchers. So, I don't know, Google DeepMind and an academic researcher and a startup all apply separately to this hospital. They all have to write their own sharing agreement. They all have to write, go through their own regulatory approvals for data security. They all have to get their own funding, whether it be VC or grant funding. So it takes quite a lot of time and effort. And all of these different researchers have access to a relatively small amount of the large pool of data. They've only got access to this one hospital. And that's the current situation at the moment. So what I'm proposing with the British Radiology Artificial Intelligence Network is that if we can somehow convince the NHS to share all of its imaging data to one central data trust, researchers can apply to this. They can use a standardized data sharing agreement, standardized security agreements, and they have access to a much, much larger data pool. So BRAIN brings together the 6 key ingredients of building algorithms. The first one obviously being the data scientists, the radiologists to label the data, the GPU processing power it takes to actually process the algorithms, the clinical validation and clinical trial infrastructure, and then the regulatory component. And without these 6 ingredients, you can't really get an algorithm to market. So you need some kind of central communication point for all of these to take part. There's another problem though. Data in the NHS isn't actually ready for machine learning technologies at the moment. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. I've written a separate blog, which I'll link later, about data readiness. But in essence, at the moment, all NHS imaging data is at level D, very low level. It's inaccessible. The format is relatively unknown. We don't know how much there is. We don't know how much exists. It's completely unanonymized. And so you can't use it for any machine learning purposes. If we started sharing it and anonymized it, it would immediately go up to level C. So it's anonymized, it's got ethical clearance, but it's still unstructured. It's very noisy and there's gaps in the data. Researchers and companies can then start playing with the data, bring it up to level B, and you start to get a truer representation of what actually is in the data. You can structure it and you can run visualizations. And visualizations are a very important part of the algorithmic construction process. You need to understand what you actually have in your data, what's there. And then level A is when you start getting the subject matter experts to label it so it's ready for a specific context and it's task ready for a specific machine learning task. An example of this would be, I don't know, if you were going to do an algorithm to find liver cancers, you need a large data set of liver CTs with pathological biopsy results, completely annotated by radiologists with their corresponding pathology, blood test results, and you need that of a relatively large size, anonymized, with ethical clearance and ready to go for machine learning. So actually the biggest cost in building algorithms is this data readiness process. It's also a big time sink and resource sink as well. So how do you actually create value out of this data? So if I start at the bottom left, I've written NHS data, currently unstructured, unanonymized, inaccessible. If we put it into a data warehouse, we can anonymize it and make it accessible. Researchers can then start to visualize and analyze the data. The data scientists will start to structure the data as they prepare it for level A and machine learning processes. The radiologists or natural language processing can annotate the data. And the data itself will then grow and mature over time via this user interaction. So you've brought it up from level D up to level A simply by sharing it with the relevant people. And once you've got level A data, which is structured, annotated, and AI ready, the pool of data increases massively in value and is much more useful to a larger proportion of people. And then you can start producing intellectual property in the form of algorithms. So BRAIN sits as a central sort of construct. There's kind of 3 main sort of revenue funds for it that I envisage. One, obviously, is the NHS data itself as an investment. Depending on who you ask, this is worth between about £3 or £100 billion, depending on how valuable you see it. We need government funding, which I'm pretty confident is going to come on the back of all this talk from the House of Lords and the life sciences policy that's been announced. But I see that we definitely need collaboration with industry, and if they can match any government funding and then convince the NHS to share their data, then you've got this really strong, central, well-funded resource. And then, of course, all the startups and companies can connect to this, and they've got access to the largest amount of data in the world of high quality. And this is why I think the UK can lead in algorithmic development in radiology. How does this create value? Well, if you actually look at siloed data, which is the darker blue line, it doesn't actually increase in value massively over time. But if you get big data, it starts to increase exponentially as the value of that data increases. So there's a big economic argument here for sharing large amounts of data. What are the benefits? At the moment, if you just create an algorithm at one hospital, it's not generalizable. It may not work as well as soon as you deploy it in another hospital. So by using data from across the country, you've got a better chance of creating a generalizable algorithm. By creating a massive data pool, you will actually increase the research activity, and this benefits the UK economy massively. If we said you can only have access to this UK data if you have a UK tax-paying company in the UK, then that automatically increases the revenue and taxation in the company, in the country. It creates an entirely new industry that doesn't yet exist in the UK. The NHS is able to share its success with all its partners and partially self-fund through just sharing this data. And it speeds up massively the time to market and the clinical impact that algorithms may have. Will patients accept it? Well, I did a very unbiased Twitter poll, and the answer was pretty much yes. So I think that bodes well. The global race. Why do we need to do this now? IBM spent $4 billion on acquiring imaging data. They bought a company called Merge Healthcare with about, I think, 7,500 health records. We have about 60 million health records in the UK, so imagine how valuable that is. China's just announced 20 billion yen on their healthcare AI strategy. Israel has funded the world's largest imaging startup, Zebra. And the American College of Radiologists is a year ahead of us. So they've got their own data science institute who are producing validation pathways and helping companies get access to data. Predicted market size in the UK, based on Sequentify research, shows how quickly this can escalate over the next 5 years. So there's a strong economic argument as well. And as Nicola mentioned, the life sciences strategy has said there should be a strong collaboration between NHS and industry for the benefit of UK patients. The UK should host up to 4 to 6 centres of excellence that provide support for specific medical technology themes, focusing on research capability in a single medtech domain. And I propose that BRAIN should be one of these centres of excellence. The UK government has also said this, you can all read, but I'm going to read it out anyway, to facilitate the sharing of data between organisations holding data and organisations looking to use data to develop AI. The government and industry should deliver a programme to develop data trusts, proven and trusted frameworks and agreements to ensure exchanges are secure and mutually beneficial. And again, I think BRAIN fits neatly into this proposed government framework. So I've been talking to as many people as will listen about this idea. The Royal College are definitely on board. NHS Digital and NHS England have shown signs of interest. I want to speak to all of the academic health science networks across the country. I've spoken to 3 of these already and hopefully many more coming up. And then I think we need to speak to the big players in industry like IBM, GE, DeepMind and others. But also at a government level, we need the DOH on board, the Alan Turing Institute, who are kind of the government's chosen advisor for AI stuff. And the MHRA needs to be heavily involved in how this stuff gets regulated. And that's kind of it, the big picture. And that's the end of my slides. Sorry for rushing through, but I only had 15 minutes. I will send a couple of links in the chat to my blog to explain this in a bit more detail. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hugh, thank you very much. As always, thank you. Very insightful and very well put together. I think you're absolutely right about how we can share this data in a way that is equitable for everybody. And one of the things I wanted to raise in the last few minutes as well was we have a steering group within NHS England looking at artificial intelligence as well. It's led by Dr. Indra Joshi, who's our clinical lead, who wasn't able to join us today, but she's asked that if anybody in this group who is interested in helping the task and finish group that we've got going on, we're looking specifically at case studies, good case studies around IG and IP. And I know that other colleagues within some of the other arm's length bodies are exploring this as well. So I think there's definitely a room here for collaboration. So if you've got anything you're prepared to share in the community, please do so. But Hugh, thank you very much. So if you've got any questions there, I'm just conscious that we're short of time, so we might be going over just a little bit. Feel free to disconnect if you need to leave at 2. Does anybody have any comments or questions here? John, are you noticing anything in the chat that I might have missed out?
Thanks, Dom. Just to give a quick heads up to the digital readiness forum, digitalready.clevertogether.com. There's a link in the channel. Thank you to everyone for participating in the text chat, and thank you to the speakers and Dom for leading another session. I look forward to meeting people again next month.
Brilliant. And thank you very much to Nicola and Hugh for giving up their time. We will be meeting again on the 10th of January at 1 p.m. I'll send out some more invites to Eventbrite. In the meantime, please connect with us to share some of the work that you're doing, or any questions, or if there's anything else that you feel we need to be talking about. The next session, we want to focus specifically on data. It seems to be a recurring theme as to access to data, what data is available, and what Hugh's talking about there in terms of data readiness. We also have a closed Facebook group. If you're interested in joining, the Facebook group is called AI and Health and Social Care, and I'll just drop that into the chat. So just to be respectful of everybody's time, we are now at the end of our session. The session will be uploaded onto YouTube, and we'll also share some details around on shared resources. So John and colleagues have been putting together a number of links that are helpful, including the work that Nicola's been doing on some of the education around AI. So we look forward to continuing sharing these. I look forward to our next session. I hope you have a nice Christmas and a nice break over that time, and we shall see you in the new year. Thank you, everybody.